we hear a lot from companies that talk about culture fit, but I don't think that's what you should aim for, because then you're trying to get people to conform to a pre-existing mold. I think what you want is culture add. As you bring someone new, are they contributing? Are they adding to the culture in the general direction that you want to take?
The Industrial Sage Executive Series, sharing the stories behind game-changing executives, their organizations, and insights into today's industry challenges.
Well, hello and welcome to today's Industrial Sage Executive Series. I am joined by Florian Pistone, who is the CEO and co-founder of InOrbit. Florian, thank you so much for joining me today on the Executive Series.
Yeah, Danny, thanks for having me.
I'm excited to get into your story. So for those who aren't familiar with InOrbit, if you could give me a little high level, who you guys are, what you do.
Yeah, we're a data platform for robot operations. So essentially, when you roll out autonomous robots or smart robots into the world, you still need to keep track of them. You still need to manage them. So we provide the infrastructure in the cloud to manage all these robots, everything from knowing what they're doing to stepping in when necessary.
All right, excellent. Well, that sounds interesting. It sounds like it's a very needed thing, especially as there is an exponential amount of, I'd say, robotics companies that are coming out, and there's all kinds of unique and different applications. And so I suspect that there's a nice challenge that poses that you guys are solving, and we'll get into that here in just a little bit. But before we do that, this is the segment where we like to dive in and get to know our guests a little bit better. This is where we want to know a little bit more about Florian. So Florian, if you could just give me some color on your background. How did you get into the technology space? Take me way back.
Yeah, I'll tell you, Danny, it has not been a straight line. Okay?
It rarely is.
and I think in the curves is where something interesting happens. So maybe a little bit about myself. I'm originally from Argentina, born and raised, studied there. Came to Silicon Valley, essentially pursuing the best technology, and worked at research labs, and then eventually got closer and closer into the business, did an MBA here at UC Berkeley. And I went from big companies to startup, back to big companies. Usually a lot of people will either pick one track or the other. But to me, it's always been just different ways to have impact. And so I've worked at some of the very well-known companies like Microsoft and Atlassian and the company now known as Meta. And as well as a lot of little startups that you probably never heard of with various degrees of success as startups go. And I think what's been the common thread throughout all of that is really, technology with a global impact. So I had the chance to work on products, for example, on video, on the internet, when it was relatively new, when it was still, being proven out, and being able to reach 1 billion people with my products was really fantastic. But then I've also worked in really new technologies like, for example, image processing, cryptography, all of these foundational technologies that we're now seeing in spaces like the one I'm in robotics. So what's interesting is some of the things that I did very early in my career without being able to foresee where they were going are things that I'm utilizing these days in this new space of robotics. And then in terms of robotics in particular, the way I like to say it is I blame my co-founder for getting me hooked on this. He's had over 12 years of experience working in robotics. His name is Julian Cerruti. He worked with a research group called Willow Garage that was extremely influential. And he started telling me about this recurring problem that robotics companies had, which is, they work really hard to make a robot, but then once you go into the physical world, into the real world, you need to scale. And scaling is hard for every business, but it's particularly hard for robotics. And so we built a lot of the foundational technologies to help them out.
Oh, that sounds, well, definitely a very interesting story there. You told me how you said you came from Argentina and you went to UC Berkeley, you're looking at the MBA program there. Take me back before that. What's the draw into the technology space? What pulled you into it?
That's a good question. For me, it's always been about what's the thing that can have the most impact. And I think we've seen the positive and sometimes negative impact of technology. And I think that very, different professions will have impact maybe at more of a local scale, right? So if you're a physician, for example, you can have a huge impact on people, but you kind of have to treat them one by one. Whereas through technology, you can reach a lot of people. Like I said, I had the fortune of working with products that had global distribution with billions of users, with over 1 billion users. So I think it's really about that reach and that impact at scale. And I could give you an example of a prior company that I started and shut down, as these things go, which was in the digital health space. And this one was really kind of a labor of love for me, a very personal thing. My dad went through a lot of health issues, and it motivated me personally to go try to help people. And I thought that through technology, I was able to do that. This particular company didn't pan out, but now you see a lot of digital health companies that are doing just that, especially when people are, less able to go to the doctor. So technology does have that empowering effect. And in a very strange twist of fate, I kind of now work on the health of robots instead of the health of people.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. That's a good point there. Was that some like EMR type technology or some sort of, yeah?
It was a lot of digital tracking of, so in the US, despite all the news that we get from COVID these days, cardiovascular disease is the #1 killer.
Absolutely, yeah.
And so I worked with 2 physicians who were specialists in treatment of cardiovascular disease. And a lot of it is about daily management, right? So blood pressure, for example, has a lot to do with, food intake and so on. So a lot of this is very lonely for people, right? You're living with your condition every day. You don't have a lot of support. So this was meant to bring that extra level of support through data and help you stay on the path to maintain your health as opposed to treating the disease.
Yeah, I think it's always fascinating with technology, as you were talking about. Just you talk about having a global impact and being able to. It's sort of the one-to-many effect versus maybe one-to-one. I think it was interesting. Especially you were talking about we're in the medical space, and that one-to-one treatment versus this technology being able to go out and sort of open right. that and touch tons of people. You mentioned you were involved in a platform that had billions of users. That's pretty exciting, and certainly would be able to touch a lot of people there. Throughout your career, who has had a big impact from an influential standpoint?
Yeah, let me answer this way. It's an interesting question, and people have influence in different ways. So I have had a great mentor really early in my career. I was doing research, and she was a world-renowned researcher, and she took the time to get to know me and to understand what my motivations were and to coach me through that. So I've always been you know, greatly appreciative of that extra time, that extra effort that somebody puts beyond what their job description is. And I also wanted to mention there was another person who had an influence through an action. I don't think it was intentional on their side. So I'll tell you the story. So
I'm intrigued.
Really, really early in my career, I was already very, passionate, I would say, about technology and about having this global impact. And I was working at a very, traditional, slow-moving organization. And I kept pushing and pushing because I knew we could do more. We could have more impact for our customers. But, people just wanted to maintain things as they were. And at one point, again, this is probably like my second manager ever. He comes to me and he says, Florian, I love all your energy. You keep pushing and pushing, but sometimes when you push so hard, the rope breaks. So he was basically telling me, look, just pipe down and play along. And it was fantastic feedback, because within like a couple of weeks, I was working somewhere else. And that helped me move my career forward. He basically said, look, if you want to stay here, you just need to go slow. And I said, nope, not for me. So I think it helped me. And years later, I remember that conversation. Again, it wasn't a pleasant conversation, and it wasn't intended as advice. So sometimes, influence that pushes you in one direction or another can come from any side.
Yeah, absolutely. No, I love that story. That is kind of a funny story. You're saying, a little bit of an unintended, maybe potential consequence or action because of that, but certainly makes a lot of sense. And you're mentioning, it's a very interesting difference between you're working with gigantic monolith companies. I mean, they're built. It's interesting. Even the companies that had startup roots, they were lean and they could pivot quickly. But then as you grow, you start adding all these other layers to be able to essentially stop the innovation, or you mentioned to maintain, and you keep adding layers and layers and layers and layers and layers. And I've always found that interesting. As if you've got the root, innovation, move, we can pivot, let's go, and then it like gets siloed, and then it's just like this giant ship you're trying to move. And it's very difficult to make change there, and so that makes a lot of sense to me. I think it's that's interesting. What was the phrase again? It was sometimes if you push. I
think
too hard,
it was something. If you're pulling too hard to get everyone to come along, the rope breaks. Yeah. So the phrase that stuck in my mind was the rope breaks. And again, I think it was meant as a just play along.
Yeah.
And I think what the value that it brought me was clarity.
Yeah.
That wasn't a fit for me.
Absolutely.
And I even today, so Inorbit is still a relatively small organization. We're about 20 people. And my co-founder and I spend so much time on culture. And people talk about culture in grandiose terms. For us, it's really like, helping people understand why we're doing what we're doing, and really, helping them bring their own way of contributing, right? So I think maybe this is too much of a rat hole, Danny.
No, this is good. Keep going.
We hear a lot from companies that talk about culture fit, but I don't think that's what you should aim for, because then you're trying to get people to conform to a pre-existing mold. I think what you want is culture add. As you bring someone new, are they contributing? Are they adding to the culture in the general direction that you want to take? And I think, as you said, it's really hard to do that at greater scale. And it's a little funny that, with a company of 20 people, we're already thinking about, okay, how will this work when we're 1,000? But I believe that you lay the foundation for that culture really early in the life of the company. And then if you've done your job right, it's self-reinforcing, right? So you tend to attract people who want to contribute and add to that culture. And if you get it wrong really early on, I mean, you did it with your hands, right? There's the roots and then the tree. Maybe the tree will be skewed. So I think it's important to get it right. And we spend a lot of effort on that.
That's awesome. I would love to dig into that a little bit more if we can. I
Sure.
love, the idea around culture, and it fits, really well into your story there as far as how that transition goes. And I love the concept of you said a culture add versus culture fit. How do you, what are some like concrete things that you're doing there to set the tone for the culture?
Yeah, maybe a little bit about the company. So we're a distributed team. So we have people all the way from, northern reaches of Canada to South America. So as a distributed team, and throughout the US also from the East Coast to the West Coast. So that adds an extra layer of challenge.
Absolutely.
When it comes to, having people feel like they're part of an organization that has a shared meaning and a shared objective. One of my, people don't usually love meetings, but I do have a favorite meeting that we do every 2 weeks on Fridays, and we call it the WINS meeting. And this is a meeting where we get together, there's no agenda per se, and people from across the company, we all get together. It's not mandatory, so it's not an official thing, but usually everyone is there. And it's really to share wins and lessons, right? So wins could be something that, you did at work, you completed some development and you want to demo to the rest of the team, or somebody, won a big deal and they want to celebrate that. So I think that's pretty normal to do celebrations of things like that. On the other hand, we also do lessons. And I think that's really valuable, which is something that didn't go according to plan. What did you learn? And sharing that with everyone else. And then this meeting kind of took a life of its own. And I'll tell you, a concrete, story. So we had an intern, and it was so one of the things we do is we rotate who is basically the MC for the meeting, for the WINS meeting. So it's a very participatory thing. So we were having our WINS meeting on May 4th, and for Star Wars geeks, that's an important day. It's
Yes.
May the 4th day, and so we ended up, I said, well, why don't we do something with Star Wars? So this intern who happened to be hosting, she put up this amazing trivia game about Star Wars. And then, we have some people at our company that are insane with trivia, like really, really good. They beat me every single time. But what's funny is this became kind of a tradition. So a lot of times we start the meeting with, tell us something about yourself, something embarrassing that you did, or a trivia game. And it took a life of its own. And what I love about it is it wasn't like a top-down thing, right? We just created a space, and then it's self-reinforcing. I don't know. I think it's a great way. It's like I said, my favorite meeting.
That's awesome. That sounds like a great meeting. I love that concept of doing that and creating a cadence and letting it sort of go beyond maybe what it was initially set up for, and kind of grow a little bit more organically. And I think I see now a little bit more where you're talking about the culture add aspect. I see that very clearly in that examal. That's fantastic.
So for example, we have an engineer on our team who does parasailing, right?
Very cool.
And so I'll admit, I kind of like look forward to when he shares a video or something, because it's kind of like vicariously living through his excitement. But you get to know people beyond just, work. And I think that's really important for me.
That's a great takeaway. So I'm writing some notes here. I think we may be implementing something like that. Similar here. Anyways, I'm very selfishly very excited about that. Thank you. No,
Awesome.
What a great thing, talking about culture and, and I thought it felt like a great, certainly an absolutely great segue. As you're building out in Orbit and maybe some of that inspiration, what's the story behind how you started it? Like, I know you mentioned that you said you kind of blame your co-founder there a little bit there, but, what's the story there? How did you start? When did you say, we're gonna make this jump and we're gonna start this venture?
So as many companies, it started with just a conversation about interesting problems to solve. Like I mentioned, my co-founder had been in the robotics space for quite some time. I came from the cloud world, so it was completely foreign to me. And maybe like a lot of people who may be watching this had my preconceived notions from like movies and so on about robots. And as I started learning more about it, I learned a couple of things. One is the old school robots that work in factories, right? Like, for example, if you go to an automaker's factory floor, you'll have these like massive robots, $1 million robots. They just do the same thing over and over. They're programmed in a very precise fashion to do the same thing over and over. What got me really excited was there's now a new generation of robots enabled by really new technology where the robots are coming into the open world. So now you'll see robots in warehouses, in farms, on construction sites, at retail stores, in airports. So really, pretty much wherever you go, there's a robot. So I live in Mountain View in California, and when the pandemic hit, we were really worried about our closed neighborhood store, our grocery store, mom and pop shop. We know the owners, and we're like, okay, how are they going to hold up? Well, this being Silicon Valley, within 2 weeks, they were doing delivery to the home via robots.
Really?
And what I thought was interesting was people's reaction to the robots, right? Because at first it was this like, oh my God, what is this? People taking pictures. That lasted about 2 weeks. And then it became part of course, robots. So I think it's interesting how we as consumers ourselves, we respond to the technology first maybe in awe, but then it becomes, part of our landscape. And I think that's what we're seeing, what's really exciting about what's happening with robotics. So back to In Orbit, we said, okay, great. How do we help? How do we see the potential, we see the impact. How can we add to that? And before we even started the company, we did, I think it was like 25 interviews with founders of robotics companies, with users, really to understand what their problems were. And we landed on this idea that, when a robot goes from the lab to the real world, there's a big transition. A lot of times, this is not probably very well known, but a lot of times in those early days, robots have chaperones. So they literally have an engineer following the robot around to make sure that it behaves as needed. And again, in the early days, you'll probably have more engineers than you have robots. Yeah. Then as you start to scale, right? When you want to go from 5 to 500, let's say, a lot of things that worked in the early days stop working. And that's something that I've seen in the cloud. And that's where my connection to this was, which is I've seen this work in the cloud, where in order to operate, the massive data centers that companies like Facebook or Microsoft operate, you couldn't do it one server at a time. You have to have these like scalable tools. So we set out to build those scalable tools for robotics. And we landed on this concept that we call RoboOps. So if you've heard of DevOps, which is, tools and practices for operating software at scale. We're bringing a lot of those ideas to the world of robotics.
That's awesome. Can you say that again? I had not heard that, and I'm not ashamed to admit that. So what was?
So in the cloud space, there's something called DevOps, and it's
DevOps. Okay, I thought you had said
it's like
something.
development and operations put together, right? So now we're doing RobOps, which is robotics operations.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
It's a cohesive idea.
Perfect. No, that makes a lot of sense, and that's great. Well, great analogy there. I mean, certainly, a connection on that. So, but I'm curious though, like, how did you said you talked to several robotics companies, just want to get an understanding. I think you said 20 or so leaders and end users. What was that moment in your mind? I mean, it sounds like you've done this before, so it's not like you've gone through this process. So, but what was it? Did you have a particular moment where you said, okay, yeah, this is it. This is a big problem that I know we can solve, and it's time to go. Let's do that. What was that moment like?
Yeah, and maybe to the point that you made about like having done this before, there's a method to the madness of starting a company, and it's generally called customer discovery and customer development, right? So customer development is a framework by Steve Blank, and you go through the process, and that's part of what guided us. And in our case, the moment of insight was precisely this idea that robots are, if you want to think about it this way, it's like servers on wheels, right? So it's like a complex computer server with lots of sensors and moving around. So it's in the, if you designed a data center, right, for hundreds of thousands of hosts or computers, you need reliable power, you need great networking, you need ventilation, right, to dissipate all that heat. So you design it and you control as much as you can. A fleet of robots, I like to call it, it's a data center from hell. It's the worst possible way of operating a distributed computing platform. Because a lot of times they're in uncontrolled environments. They have networks that come in and out. They're on battery. So they need to come back on their own to recharge if they're a mobile robot. So the challenges are much, much higher. And when we talk to a lot of these robotics companies, what we realized is a lot of them weren't necessarily thinking about those problems of scaling. And if you're very passionate about robotics, maybe you have a PhD and you work as a roboticist, you're really, you have to focus on building that robot. And we felt we could augment and help them focus on that. And we'll take care of the, the boring part, if you will, of running the robots at scale.
Yeah, no, that's exciting. So maybe an oversimplification of what you do, and I'm a little nervous about saying this, but it sounds like you're helping to solve. I mean, there's a lot of different challenges, but I know there's a big challenge of interoperability, certainly in the space, because there are it's interesting to see the growth of robotics over the last several years. I mean, it was a fast trajectory of growth, and then you pile on the pandemic, and the huge needs just grew exponentially, and they continue. And I can't remember there was a stat that I've seen as far as how many new robotics companies are on. You have players who've been in here for years and years and years, and then you've got constantly new startups. And it's interesting because, like you mentioned, a lot of people think you watch Terminator or all these other robotics and AI and movies, and oh wow, it's going to take over the world and all these things. And the reality of it is even though that, yes, when you've got from an automation standpoint, or you mentioned automotive, you've got these giant, maybe these FANUC robots that have been there and they're moving, but they're very set in place, or they're caged. when you've got all of these AMRs that are now kind of, they've got more autonomy and they're going around all over the place, it's totally opened up the playing field. But the problem being that that's great, but you can still only solve a finite amount of problems with this particular robot. You may need a whole fleet of 10 different types of robots to solve some of these different challenges. Is that part of what you're solving there with some of the software solutions?
Absolutely. So if I can get really geeky here,
please get really geeky
for a minute. We like to say we solve the 4 O's of robot operations, right? So the first O is observability. And this is kind of like a fancy word for monitoring, but it's really knowing through data what's up, right? What is the robot doing? And it has its own set of challenges, as I described, because they're all over the place. They're on, weak networks sometimes. So we solve that problem, and that's kind of like, that becomes the foundation because it's the data. So at our core, we're a data platform. But then from there, there's an operational aspect, which is, robots get into situations where they're no longer autonomous, they're stuck. And this happens, I won't disclose numbers, but it happens a lot more than everyone anticipates, right? I think we have this picture of a robot, oh, it must be perfect. Far from it, especially when you're in crazy environments. You talked about a warehouse, for example, but we've seen robots in retail stores while there's shoppers around. So, there's going to be a kid with a shopping cart and ketchup stains on the floor. So you can't expect the robot to be perfect. And that's where some of these, augmenting the robot by human operators is a way to do that. So that's the second O, operations. I think then you get into optimization. So what you really want is to not have those problems happen as often, right? How can you resolve it? And we do things like, tools for root cause analysis. So root cause analysis allows you to identify cases where things didn't go as planned and derive insights from it. And just to give you a sense of scale, each robot may generate a terabyte of data per hour. So the approach of we'll just throw everything to the cloud isn't really practical, right? Especially as you're thinking about, we now have fleets of, thousands of robots operating in the world. So that takes us, optimization is how do I run my fleet more efficiently? But then the last O is getting to what you were mentioning before. We call it orchestration. Again, that's a very cloud term, but it's really how do I bring different components together in a harmonious way, right? So now you're more like the conductor of the orchestra. And that can include, many different types of robots from different vendors. So in a warehouse, for example, you may have, let's say there's a cargo dock and a truck comes in. Well, you need to unload it. So there are now autonomous forklifts that can do part of that job, or maybe all of it one day. Then you have pallets. You need a depalletizing robot that will break down the pallet into its components. Now you need to take it into the warehouse proper. How do you do that? Do you do it, one by one? And traditionally, a lot of these warehouses have conveyor belts. And conveyor belts are really efficient, but they're really expensive and they're really inflexible. So what an AMR, an autonomous mobile robot, gives you is flexibility because it's controlled through software. So that's where we're able to bring all of these robots from different vendors and give someone a complete view. The term in the industry is a single pane of glass, one way to see all of your IT, or in this case, OT, in one view. And I think that's where this is going. And you see really kind of like pioneering companies like FedEx really advocating for this ability to control different robots.
Yeah, no, that's super interesting. Thank you so much for getting you said, I think you said geeky with me, or or getting into the technical weeds. I appreciate that. Actually, one thing in particular I had no idea, never heard this before. 1 terabyte of data per hour that one robot could generate. That's a ton of data, especially if you've got a fleet of hundreds of these things. Transmitting that and getting that, storing it, and then analyzing it that's crazy. That's a lot of data.
A lot of times, Danny, of those terabytes of data, you just need this one
right.
piece of data.
Right.
The proverbial needle in the haystack. And I think that's what we do is we try to turn all of that data into insights that people can take action on.
Right. Absolutely. Well, there's a ton there. So a couple of the questions that I've got that kind of coming up then. How do you engage with your customers? Are your customers obviously you talked about robotics companies. So I imagine do you have would your customers be robotics companies, end users, and integrators, or do you work with one, all? How does that work?
We work with different players in the ecosystem. At the end of the day, because of our orientation towards operations, we really care about maximizing the potential of every robot. So as a robot vendor, of course you want a more efficient robot, a robot that fails less often or that requires fewer interventions. So we can provide a lot of data for them to improve on their robot. As an end user, you're really running the robots, right? In fact, I like to say, and this is a little shocking maybe for companies in the robotic space, that end users, they don't really care about the robots. They care about their process, right? And what the robot
Very
can control.
True. Yeah.
Their needs are going to be a little different, right? They're all based on the same foundation of data, but what they're trying to do is they're trying to drive this SLA higher and higher and higher. And what's interesting is there's this kind of middle ground between those two cases that I mentioned, which is this idea of robotics as a service. So increasingly you see companies that instead of selling you a robot and now you do whatever you want with it, they'll essentially sell you a service that is backed by their own robots. And we're starting to see, this is very new, kind of third-party companies that will say, okay, I'm not going to make the robot. I'm not an end user. I'm just going to run these robots at scale. So we can help them with our infrastructure to do that, like I said, at scale, across robots, across sites, and across customers.
Yeah, that sounds super interesting, and I have heard you've definitely over the last little bit or so, robotics as a service. I think it's a super fascinating play, and certainly with all the labor issues that we've got going on now, it's certainly a lot of companies are turning towards automation in any way they can. There's a huge shift in the digital transformation that is happening. It was happening before, but again, because of the pandemic, in all areas, you're seeing it, supply chain, manufacturing, all up and down, logistics, and beyond. End users. You're mentioning retail and grocery, for example. I love the story that you talked about how the response with the local grocery store in the neighborhood. You said being Silicon Valley. What do we do? That's it's fascinating. But we're continuing to see more of that, and we'll see more. What does the future look like for you?
So I'd like to think of this future where, we have millions of robots around the world that are positively impacting billions of people, right? So each robot can have this multiplier effect, whether it's a robot in a farm making. So one of the companies that we're familiar with is basically a robot that goes in a farm, identifies weeds, and then literally saps them with lasers. So instead of having to have herbicides and spray it, you can turn that to zero. A customer of ours has been able to grow leafy greens with a 90% reduction in the use of water. So again, all of these are things that are not moving the needle a little bit. They're moving it a lot. We're seeing a lot of, electrification, also, which a lot of times goes with autonomy together. And we see that reducing, for example, the carbon emissions. Like these little robots that deliver around Mountain View, they're replacing somebody driving around in their car, getting out of the car, dropping the groceries, and getting back in the car. So I think these things have huge impact. But to take it a little bit further, where we see the future is the, collaboration between robots and people. And I think we're only starting to see the shape of that. But I like to talk about this, what we call a roboteer, kind of like a puppeteer, but for robots.
Yeah.
So maybe your job isn't to go deliver food or isn't to unload a truck. You're monitoring, you're the boss of a group of robots that are doing those things. And, just like we said, the robots may not work fully autonomously, fully independently all the time. There's always going to be corner cases or areas where somebody needs to intervene. But now maybe you can do, instead of sitting in a forklift and driving it around, maybe you can supervise 5 forklifts or 10 forklifts. So, and you don't even need to be there, right? You could be doing it through our platform or through other people's platform. You could be in an air-conditioned room, sitting in an ergonomic chair, and responding to events as they happen. And I think that vision of collaboration between people and robots, and obviously the cloud and AI that come into that. I think that's a great, in my mind, a very optimistic vision of the future.
That's really interesting. I like that. And it's interesting. People always harp on robotics. It was taking people's jobs away, and it's the answer we keep hearing is I love. So I haven't heard this. The roboteer.
Yes.
I mean, it makes a lot of sense, and you're saying I do certainly believe that is where the future is going to. When you look at a lot of these jobs as well, I mean, obviously we've got major issues right now for a whole host of reasons. But the trend for years, though, before this has been a lot of people they don't want to work. I don't want to work in a warehouse, or I don't want to work in manufacturing, or religious. There's been a struggle trying to attract. So if there's a way to say, listen, we're already seeing a decline in that. If we can bring in a solution over here from a technology standpoint to be able to assist people in those jobs, it's creating an increased net effect, net positive effect.
Yeah, and you say I don't want to work. I think these are tough jobs. So
yes.
I've had the opportunity to tour some facilities, and without automation, your job may be to literally walk 15 miles a day within
right.
the warehouse,
right,
pushing a cart back and forth.
Right.
Let me tell you, that's not good on your knees, right?
Right.
It may be super healthy because you're walking a lot, but it's not necessarily the best environment where you want to do that. And what we've seen this tremendous increase in productivity while also improving health of the workers, where you can have, instead of somebody pushing the cart knows where to go, right? So when you think about a robot, some people may have this idea of like a humanoid robot. A lot of robots have very boring shapes.
Right.
Where they resemble something that has existed all along, but now they add, autonomy to it. So if the cart can go where it needs to go, now you're focused on picking the right products and putting them on the cart, not on walking back and forth. So that has, again, that dual effect of, better, less wear and tear on the body.
Yeah.
and also greater productivity. Some companies will see 300% productivity increases by introducing an AMR. So I think it can very much be a win-win.
Certainly, no, absolutely, absolutely. So, all right, my last question is a very, very difficult question. Since you brought up Star Wars earlier and you were working in the robotics space, I'm curious, what's the difference between a robot and a droid?
I think it's just a terminology thing, but like everyone knows R2D2.
Yeah. Who's that? Sorry, no, I'm just playing.
So that is actually called an astromech droid. So this is me showing off my,
all right, here we
Star
go.
Wars nerdiness. Yep. And they do have different models. Not all of them are R2D2, right? So you do have in the Star Wars universe different types of droids that do different things. So, they already had this orchestration problem in Star Wars. And, maybe they're using, in orbit, star, maybe there's something there.
Maybe, and it's a great parlay from the question of the future. So there we go. Listen, Florian, I really have appreciated our conversation, and thank you for obliging. I loved your answer. Thank you so much on that, and for just sharing all your insights about the industry, what you guys are doing, sharing your story, and how you kind of, you've got to where you are today. It sounds like you guys have a very bright future, no pun intended with the Star Wars analogy. I really do think that you guys are solving some big challenges and creating some unique opportunities in a space that is exploding. So I'm going to be very excited to follow you guys. So for those companies who would like to learn more about you, I've got the website here, the URL, inorbit.ai. Make sure that's correct. We'll have that in the show notes. And Florian, again, just thank you so much for your time with us today.
Danny, it's been a lot of fun. Thank you so much.
I've enjoyed it too. All right. Well, that wraps up today's Industrial Sage Executive Series with Florian Pistone, who is the CEO and co-founder of InOrbit. You can go check them out at inorbit.ai. I loved today's episode. Great story, a lot of great insights here. So if you liked today's episode, you need to go to industrialsage.com if you're not there right now, and you need to subscribe because you're missing out on great content like this. Not only do we have the executive series, we also have news, and we've got a lot of other great content coming down the pike. And so you don't want to miss it, I guarantee it. So subscribe, don't miss out, and I'll be back next week on another episode of Industrial Sage.
Thank you for joining us for this week's episode. Get notified every time there's a new episode by signing up for our email newsletters. You can also subscribe wherever you get your podcasts. And while you're there, please leave us a review so more industrial professionals can find us. Want us to tell your story? Go to industrialsage.com. This week's episode was produced by Rika Wiersma, filmed and edited by Optimum Productions, and our executive producer is Danny Gonzalez. Thank you for watching Industrial Sage.